Sup, you guys? It's Sir Tom Hackerai, a unshaven Sir Tom Hackerai, here in the basement of my group home to show you guys something cool. This is the current iteration of my retro setup. It's a little crowded, a lot crowdeder than it was a few months ago, where it was just the Master System, maybe the Genesis. So I brought these things out because I felt like a hankering for 8 and 16-bit stuff. Normally I'm more of a 32-bit plus kind of guy, but them's the breaks. So what I want to talk about is this little shit nugget, the Sega CD. So the Sega CD is actually one of my favorite pieces of Sega hardware. Not because it's the best library, but it's because it's one of the cooler pieces of tech that Sega does. Like, I would just sit here, and I'm just going to power this on real quick, and just hope to God that the CRT doesn't look terrible on this thing. And I would just sit and watch this BIOS animation for God knows how long, and just listening to the kick-ass music. And I fucking love this. I absolutely love this. As the camera goes in and out of focus as I put my hand out. And I just love it. I love it very much. But on the other hand, this thing did fail for a reason. And the reason the Sega CD kind of exists is because Sega got they got penis envy from NEC with their TurboGrafx CD add-on. I mean, to be more accurate, it was the PC Engine CD-ROM or whatever. And Sega's like, oh yeah? Well, guess what? My big penis CD add-on is gonna have it's gonna have a ghetto version of our super scalar technology, so it can do mode 7 and shit. It's gonna be a little better than the TurboGrafx thing because it'll do FMVs slightly better. And they jacked up the hardware to the point where it needed a separate CPU to handle everything. And it ended up being really expensive. And then Sega, being absolute fucking dumbasses, they then made the Model 1 way too unreliable because they used a standard audio CD drive that wasn't used to the higher seek rates that CD-ROMs require, especially ones that have games on them. And that thing was an absolute nightmare. Then they made this, the Model 2, which is what I have, and it's a lot more reliable, handles burned games a bit better, and generally it's more compact, and it's still pretty good looking. But still, it looks like, it looks like the Genesis just got a pituitary disorder and has a giant wart that's somehow 3 times its size just sticking out of the side. Kind of like that one kid from Fairly Odd Parents, the kid with the boil on his face. So yeah. And I just want to show off my Sega CD collection because it is a bit small, but as you'll find out, the Sega CD, when it comes to smaller stuff, great things come in small packages. So let's move over to here. And my method of storing these games is less than optimal, but I do not have space here. This is literally just a corner etched out in the hallway of the basement. In fact, there's the basement door. And yeah, so let's see what we got here. So when I first got my Genesis, it came with the Sega CD. That Sega CD is long gone because it broke itself. Well, it didn't break physically, it just stopped working. And a botched repair kind of sent it to the scrapyard, and I had to get that one off of eBay. Also and I had to get this one off of eBay, this refurbished unit, because I have a second Sega CD that's in the original box, and that went missing. Technically, it isn't missing. It's just put in a box that didn't get put into my mom's car when I was moving out of her house. And so it's kind of just stuck in her basement for whatever reason. So a lot of the first games that I got for the Genesis were all the Sega CD games that came with it. I used to have Sewer Shark, but I don't know where that went. And considering that I moved multiple times from when I got that game, and now that Sewer Shark is probably somewhere. So the games that I initially got with my system was NBA Jam, Thunderstrike, Android Assault, and Demolition Man. Also, Soulstar. Those are the first few games that I got, and it's very fortuitous that I got those games, because a lot of those are the rarer, more expensive games, especially considering that Demolition Man was the last official release on the Sega CD. I think Android Assault's pretty expensive. Soulstar, but, you know. But this collection has grown slightly over the years, including some poverty copies, and I say poverty copies because, I mean, look at them. Of course, this is the kind of Sega CD games you would, quote-unquote, get a hold of if you have absolutely no money, but have a home computer with a CD drive, so. Anyway, so let's talk about these suckers. Self-Feed I bought, I think, alongside Sonic CD off of LukeyGames.com, and those two games are particularly good. Albeit I've played Sonic CD a lot more, because that's the superior game, and I just fucking love Sonic CD. Anybody who gets a Sega CD, this is required playing. So is this. Maybe not this, but definitely this. Another purchase I made that expanded the collection slightly was Lunar, and I remember getting this game, I think either on my birthday or on Halloween, and I bought it from Game Underground back when they were in the Natick Mall, and this game was honestly really cool. It's one of the few turn-based RPGs that actually showed up on Sega hardware at the time. Of course, its Working Designs did the localization for this, so they went all out with the packaging. Not so much with the localization and the general difficulty, but this is before Working Designs really got on their bullshit, as we'll soon see in a moment. If I could just, I'll just put it back in later when I'm done filming. So that was my collection for the longest time, until I started getting really into the Sega CD a couple years ago, and that's when I started really expanding this collection. I got Jurassic Park. This is basically a click-and-point adventure game. The Sega CD had numerous of those for some reason. Not sure why. Then I got Jaguar XJ220, and this was made by the same people that made the Lotus series. So it's actually really good, but it's kind of tricky because I think fake 3D racing games are a lot harder than real 3D racing games. Mostly because it's hard to judge corners and the tracks aren't really well designed around the fact that, of course I would get used to like proper 3D racing games rather than the fake 2D shit, but here we are. And it's in the original cardboard packaging, which sucks because, for some reason, Sega didn't start out using these shitty, unreliable, easy-to-break jewel cases. No, they thought cardboard was the future, so that was interesting. Of course, they then went back to cardboard anyway, so. But then I also got Formula 1 Beyond the Limit. This game is actually really cool because it really uses the Sega CD tech of like sprite scaling and the weird Mode 7 it has. But it's also a racing simulation game before racing simulation games got really good. I think any racing simulation game made before Gran Turismo kind of suck. And every racing simulation game made since Gran Turismo was a lot better. But that's merely my opinion. So don't take that with a grain of salt. Then I got Vi, and Vi's really interesting because a lot of people don't like this game. They think it's really mid, and part of that is because this is when Working Designs really started making their games artificially difficult by jacking up enemy stats, jacking up the cost of magic, making healing everything more ineffective, and they even made some even more questionable localization choices. And it's also a super grindy game because of it. However, I think this game had a lot of therapeutic value because I think grinding in of itself is a therapeutic activity. Because it's just good to just turn off your brain and make some sort of small-scale goal for yourself. Like, oh, I'm going to level up this character. Oh, I'm going to get enough money to buy another stack of strange brews because they're super expensive for some reason. Like, it's always good to get yourself, like, small goals. Plus, it's very easy to grind yourself silly in this game. Like, I think I'm about 5 levels higher than a walkthrough I'm looking at for this game recommends, so maybe I'm doing good in this game. Who knows? It's Working Designs. They make all their games bullshit. Then we have Third World War, which is an interesting game because it is a strategy game. In fact, the Sega CD had a lot of those games, just a lot of strategy games, a lot of, like, it's the Sega CD is really weird because it has a lot of games that, like, work well on PC, but it was before a time where, like, where developers really figured out how to make PC games work on consoles, or at least not as well. But still, I'm just glad that the Sega CD has that, you know, in its library. And that's really it. For one thing, I think you shouldn't sleep on the Sega CD, mostly because it has a small nucleus of really cool games. But at the same time, it's also totally understandable why anyone wants to sleep on the Sega CD, mostly because it's full of FMV garbage that nobody likes. The hardware is kind of rare, kind of unreliable, and generally it's just a hassle to deal with, especially since there's better CD consoles. Like, I think I think the video game industry didn't really start hitting this sort of tech out of the park until, like, the 5th console generation, where CDs became standard, and knowledge of how optical disc drives work became more commonplace. So, but with that said, there is still, like, some good traditional games available on the Sega CD. In fact, this thing has a weirdly large amount of Euro platformer. So if you're into, like, that kind of garbage, you know, that where the fuck do I go kind of games that was, like, that kind of platformer game that's, like, super popular on the Commodore Amiga and the Atari ST and whatever else Europeans were into at the time. So, but yeah. This is the Sega CD written large. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Anyway, here's the ending logo to show you that the video is over. Bye.